Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily Signal, where we cut through the noise and turn breaking cyber events into lessons you can actually use. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly how Jaguar Land Rover's recent cyber crisis turned from a simple network breach into a global economic shock. And more importantly, how your own organization can avoid being the next JLR. Here's the payoff. By the end of this video, you will know the 3 early warning signs that JLR missed and the one control that would have cut their downtime by half. Now, before we dive in, here's a little teaser. This wasn't a sophisticated zero-day attack. No exotic malware, no nation-state level exploits. The whole thing started with something every company still struggles with: old credentials and flat networks. And I'll show you in a few minutes how that simple combination cost billions and triggered a government level intervention. We handled an incident fairly similar to this just last month. Not at JLR, but at another large manufacturer. And I'll share the simplified version of that playbook in plain English so you can apply it tomorrow morning. So stick with me, because this isn't just about cars or factories. It's about what happens when one company's network outage becomes a national crisis. Before we get started, drop a quick check in the comments if your organization has already done a full credential hygiene audit this year, and let's see how many of you are ahead of the curve. All right, let's get into how 1Password from 2021 managed to silence the factory floors of one of the world's most iconic automakers. Let's walk through the story of what really happened at Jaguar Land Rover, because this wasn't just another cyber attack. It was a chain reaction that shut down production lines, froze dealerships, and forced the government to step in. Here's how it unfolded. Late August 2025, JLR detected unusual network activity, what looked like a routine IT incident. Within hours, it escalated from this into a full-blown crisis. Every plant in the UK went dark. The shutdown spread to suppliers, dealerships, and even their international operations. At one point, more than 1,000 vehicles a day stopped rolling off the line. The complication was not timing. This happened right before New Plate Day, one of the most profitable sales period for UK dealerships. Stock dried up overnight. Invoices stopped. Cash flow froze. And because JLR runs on a just-in-time supply model, their 5,000 suppliers got hit instantly. By week 2, the ripple effect was massive. Suppliers were furloughing their staff, dealerships were missing incentives, and analysts estimated a total impact of about £1.9 billion to the UK economy. That's when the government stepped in. The UK Treasury approved a £1.5 billion loan guarantee to keep suppliers afloat and prevent the auto sector from collapsing. It wasn't just about helping JLR, it was about protecting an entire ecosystem. And here's the so what. One company's downtime became everyone's downtime. The event proved that in a hyper-connected supply chain, a cyber attack is no longer an IT problem. It's an economic event. In a minute, I'll show you what actually failed inside JLR's network, and it's not what most people think. Spoiler, it wasn't the robots or the assembly line systems. It started with something far more ordinary and far easier. So here is where things get really interesting, because everyone assumes that JLR Shutdown was caused by an attack on its factory systems, so robots offline, production lines frozen, some kind of advanced malware in the OT environment. But the truth is, the robots were fine. It was the network that was not. Here's what actually happened behind the scenes. The initial breach started on the IT side through old, valid credentials. Some of them dated back to 2021, and a few were even linked to third-party suppliers who still had dormant access to JLR internal portals. Add to that inconsistent MFA policies, and you've got an attacker's dream. Legitimate credentials, no second factor, and a flat network with almost no segmentation between IT and OT. Once inside, the attackers moved laterally from corporate servers to production scheduling and then into planned control systems through shared admin accounts. At that point, containment became simply impossible. Rather than risk corrupted build data or tainted configurations reaching assembly line, JLR hit the big red button, a global shutdown. Think about that. The decision was not triggered by ransomware on a laptop. It was triggered by the fear of propagation. And that's what made this incident so damaging. It wasn't just what attackers did, it was how flat architecture amplified the risk. Logs later showed hundreds of gigabytes of data exfiltrated, possibly design files and supplier documentation. And because the attackers tampered with log archives, it took weeks just to figure out what had been touched. So what's the insight here? Well, the real weakness wasn't fancy malware. It was credential hygiene and network design. If JLR had enforced MFA everywhere, segmented supplier access, and monitored for data exfiltration spikes, this would have been a containment exercise, not a 6-week shutdown. Coming up next, we're going to follow the money and see how one breach spiraled into almost 1.9 billion pounds lesson in why downtime is the new disaster. Now let's talk about what that 6-week shutdown actually cost, because this is where the number start to hurt. When the breach hit, Jaguar Land Rover was burning through roughly 50 million pounds every week in halted production, penalties, and idle staff. That's 50 million pounds just to stand still. Across the full 6-week outage, the direct hit was estimated at hundreds of millions in lost revenue. But the real story isn't just JLR's balance sheet, it's the ripple effect. More than 5,000 suppliers were suddenly left without orders. Dealerships couldn't get new vehicles in time for New Plate Day, one of the biggest sales week of the year, and because so many small manufacturers depend on JLR's cash flow, the UK government had to step in with a 1.5 billion pounds loan guarantee to keep them from collapsing. In total, economists put the wider impact at around 1.9 billion pounds across the UK economy. That's not a breach anymore, it's a systemic shock. And here's the kicker. JLR didn't have dedicated cyber insurance that could cover this kind of loss. So the company carried most of the burden itself, and taxpayers effectively underwrote the rest through that government backstop. This is where the follow the money principle comes in. Every hour of downtime is now a financial liability, not just an IT problem. Cyber resilience isn't about stopping attacks anymore. It's about limiting how long they can stop you. So the takeaway? Well, downtime is the actual disaster. If you can reduce recovery time by even 24 hours, you are not just saving reputation, you are saving tens of millions of pounds. In the next part, we'll look at how those losses cascaded down the supply chain from Tier 1 factories all the way to dealership floors, and why just-in-time manufacturing turned into a just stop overnight. All right, so how this cyber attack didn't just cripple JLR, but actually rippled through an entire supply chain built on efficiency, and exposed just how fragile the just-in-time principle really is. Here's what happened downstream. When JLR hit the brakes, its Tier 1 suppliers, the companies delivering components every few hours, suddenly had nowhere to send their goods. Invoices froze, production lines stopped, some suppliers had to furlough workers within days. Others were asked by banks to pledge personal assets just to keep cash flow alive. A few smaller firms said openly, "We can survive 3 weeks, maybe 4, not 6. Meanwhile, dealerships got hit at the worst possible moment. As we said, the new plate day. That's when sales normally spike and commissions surge. But this time, there were no vehicles to be delivered. Dealer management systems went down with the same network freeze, and sales teams had to write orders manually. Customers were left waiting, incentives were lost, and the dealership's revenue cratered. And because of how interconnected the UK auto ecosystem is, the government couldn't just stand by. That's why, as we said, the Treasury stepped in with a £1.5 billion loan guarantee, not for JLR directly, but to protect the thousands of small companies at risk of collapsing as collateral damage. So the big insight, well, just in time became the just stop. So when there's zero buffer in parts, data, or cash, one cyber attack upstream can bankrupt companies downstream. Now what then? Well, organizations that depend on real-time digital supply chains need to rethink their resilience math. That means adding redundancy, segmenting supplier systems, and building air gaps not just in inventory but in data access. Because efficiency might make your business lean, but as JLR just proved, it also makes it brittle. Up next, we'll look at the who might be behind this and why they chose JLR, because the motives in this case go away beyond ransom. So, the people behind the attack. Understanding the why is just as important as the how. In the JLR case, there are 3 main theories about who was responsible, and each one tells us something different about where cyber risk is headed. The first group, and the most likely, is financially motivated criminal crews. A name that surfaced early on was the Scattered Lapsus Hunters, a splinter group known for using social engineering and credential theft instead of flashy 0 days. Their model is simple: gain access, exfiltrate valuable data, and then demand ransom by threatening to leak it. But here's the twist: JLR never confirmed paying, and the attack looked less like a smash and grab and more like an extortion through disruption. Production downtime became the pressure point. The second theory points to state-linked actor, not necessarily because of who they are, but because of what they targeted. This wasn't an attack for a quick cash, it's a hit to a strategic industry, the automotive manufacturing, which plays a major role in national GDP, jobs, and exports. From an adversary's perspective, disrupting that kind of infrastructure has geopolitical leverage. You don't need to steal blueprints when you can stall an entire economy for 6 weeks. And finally, a smaller but growing concern, activist or ideological actors. In recent years, we have seen groups driven by climate or anti-corporate causes targeting manufacturing and logistics under the banner of eco-justice. To them, shutting down production isn't theft, it's protest. Now, where is the so what here? The motives for cyber attacks are evolving. It's no longer just about data or money, it's about impact. And that's exactly what we saw with JLR. A shift from information theft to operational disruption. Downtime itself has become the product. And here's the key insight. When attacks move from IT theft to OT shutdown, your firewall isn't your defense anymore. Resilience is. Next, we'll look at who else might be sitting in this same danger zone, the industry that could be the next JLR, and what they should do right now to avoid the same fate. So, if this could happen to Jaguar Land Rover, who could be next? That's the question everyone started asking after this attack, and honestly, the list of potential targets is quite long. Because what happened at JLR wasn't about one company, it was about a pattern that applies to an industry built on real-time connectivity. Let's start with the obvious one, automotive. JLR wasn't the first, and certainly won't be the last. Toyota had a 14 plant shutdown in 2022 because of a small supplier hit by ransomware. Stellantis and BMW have both experienced major data breaches in the last 2 years. The entire sector runs on shared systems, design data, manufacturing schedules, logistics, so an attack on one node can ripple across the whole network in hours. Then there's aerospace. Same issue, different altitude. Complex, high-value supply chain, tight government contracts, and limited redundancy. A single supplier breach can ground entire fleets or delay defense deliveries. Energy and logistics, we have already seen it. Remember the NotPetya taking down Maersk in 2017, or the Colonial Pipeline attack that caused fuel shortages across the US? Those were early warning shots, proof that cyber incidents can trigger real-world crises. Even sectors people don't think of as critical, like retail, finance, healthcare, are exposed. Marks and Spencer lost an estimated £300 million in online revenue after its e-commerce system went down for just days. Hospitals have had to cancel surgeries because of ransomware. It's all the same playbook. Hit the systems that people depend on every day and you control the clock. So, the so what here? This isn't about who's next, it's about who's ready. Any organization running just-in-time operational, digital twins, or hyper-connected suppliers is a candidate for the next systemic breach. If you cannot absorb downtime, you are already vulnerable. So now what? Start by asking a simple question. If we had to shut down for 7 days, what would it cost and who would it hurt? Because every industry now has its own JLR moment waiting to happen. And coming up next, we'll look at what JLR could have done differently, the specific controls and decisions that would have shortened that shutdown from 6 weeks to just a few days. So, what could have stopped this from turning into a 6-week shutdown? Because this is where we move from hindsight to strategy. If we look at the forensics and the response timeline, there were a few controls that, if implemented earlier, could have turned this from a national crisis into a bad week. Let's start with the first. MFA everywhere. I know it sounds basic, but JLR's initial entry point came through old valid credentials, some dating back to 2021, as we said. Had multi-factor authentication been enforced across every admin and supplier account, that entire attack path collapses. So the first control is kill legacy credentials and enforce MFA 100%. Next, segmentation between IT and OT. The attackers didn't breach the robots, they breached the network that connects the robots. If a proper firebreak had been in place between corporate systems and planned operations, lateral movement would have stopped cold. This one change could actually have saved tens of millions in production losses. Then there's detection speed. During the attack, large volumes of data were being exfiltrated, hundreds of gigabytes we're talking about, and it went unnoticed for days. A tuned SIEM with an anomaly rule for new admin creation plus high data throughput would have flagged it within minutes. So the second big control, MTTD under 15 minutes. So minimum time to detect under 15 minutes. Number 4, offline immutable backups with tested recovery. JLR's backup data was safe, but their restore time was low because procedures weren't fully automated. Testing recovery monthly, not annually, can actually mean the difference between a few hours of downtime and an entire week of lost production. And finally, supplier access hardening. Most people forget that external vendors often have deeper access than internal staff. Requiring MFA, enforcing last privilege, and reviewing supplier accounts quarterly would have prevented stale credentials from lingering in the system. So here's the so what in this case. If JLR had applied just these 5 controls, analysts estimate the outage would have been cut from 6 weeks to less than 10 days. Same threat, completely different outcome. You don't need a massive overhaul. You need focus. Start with identity, segmentation, monitoring, backups, and supplier governance, because those 5 pillars don't just block attacks. They buy you time, and in a crisis, time is everything. Next slide, we'll look beyond technology into governance, insurance, and policy, and ask who really pays when a cyber attack becomes an economic event. Okay, so let's talk about that part that doesn't usually make headlines. What happens after the attack, when the dust settles and everyone starts asking who pays for this? Because in JLR case, the financial and policy aftermath was almost as dramatic as the breach itself. Let's start with the boardroom. After the shutdown, cybersecurity stopped being an IT line item, it became an operational risk. The board had to start thinking in new terms. What's our maximum tolerable downtime? How many hours of production can we afford to lose before it hits the bottom line? That's when they realized resilience isn't just about firewalls, it's about funding continuity. Now over to the insurance angle. Is a surprising fact. JLR had no dedicated cyber insurance for an event of this magnitude. That meant that losses, roughly £5 million a week, were largely self-funded. And that triggered a bigger debate across the industry. Should cyber insurance be mandatory for companies considered systematically important? Considered systemically important to the nation economy? Because when private companies fail, it's often the taxpayer who ends up footing the bill. And that brings us to the government. When the UK stepped in with that £1.5 billion loan guarantee, it wasn't just a bailout, it was a precedent. It blurred the line between corporate risk and national security. If a manufacturing giant can cause a multi-billion pound shock to GDP, do governments have to regulate cybersecurity the same way they regulate financial stability? The JLR case has officially made cyber resilience a shared responsibility between boards, insurers, and government. And the big unknown now is this: will regulators move towards NIS2 style mandates for industrial sectors? Will insurers start demanding real-time risk telemetry before issuing coverage? Or will we keep relying on emergency bailouts when the next big one hits? So now what? If you are a board member, CFO, or risk manager watching this, here's your takeaway. Don't wait for legislation to force the issue. Align your budget, your insurance, and your recovery capabilities now before your downtime becomes everyone else's problem. Our next and final slide will pull all of this together into a 90-day roadmap. The Resilience Boost Index, RBI, showing exactly how much stronger your organization can get each month if you start acting now. This is where we wrap it all up and turn the JLR crisis into something actionable. This is your 90-day resilience sprint, powered by what we call the RBI, the Resilience Boost Index. It's a simple idea. Every 30-day block of action boosts your organization's ability to survive and recover from a cyber attack. And we can actually measure that improvement. Let's start with the days 0 to 30, or otherwise called Stabilize the Blast Zone. This is your foundation step, the one that stops the bleeding, basically. By implementing all these measures in this block, identity lockdown, MFA across the board, supplier credentials cleanup, and segmentation IT from OT, you get an estimated plus 40% resilience boost. That means you have eliminated the most common causes of catastrophic spread. In JLR's case, that single step could have kept factory systems safe even while corporate IT was compromised. So, 40% stronger just by cleaning up your identity and network hygiene. Then comes days 31 to 60, harden and resynchronize. This is where you rebuild securely. You roll out golden images, patch everything, require verified MFA for all suppliers, and turn and tune your monitoring until you can detect suspicious behavior within 15 minutes. Run tabletop exercises, so simulate lateral movement, test escalation paths, make sure people know what to do when alerts go off. When you complete this block, you add another plus 30% boost, bringing your total to 70% resilience. That's the point where you have moved from firefighting to control, so the attacker surface shrinks and your response time closes the gap. And finally, days 61 to 90, institutionalize resilience. Now you embed what you have learned into the culture. You deploy zero trust gateways between IT, OT, and suppliers. You test full restore and restart within 4 hours, and you certify every key vendor for cyber compliance. You create a permanent resilience budget that's tied to maintaining this posture, not just reacting to the next crisis. By the end of this phase, you add another plus 25% boost, hitting a 95% resilience score. At that level, a breach becomes an inconvenience, not an existential threat. You can isolate, recover, and restart within 48 hours, The kind of response that could have turned JLR's £1.9 billion disaster into a brief slowdown. Here's the big takeaway then. If you follow this 90-day sprint, stabilize, harden, institutionalize, you will have cut your risk by roughly 75% and proven it with measurable metrics. Because resilience shouldn't be just a buzzword. It should be a number you can show to your board. And that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for sticking with me all the way through. We have unpacked the Jaguar Land Rover cyber crisis from every angle, how a simple credential flaw froze production, how downtime turned into a £1.9 billion economic event, and how identity, segmentation, and governance could have changed the outcome completely. More important, you now have the 90-day Resilience Boost Index playbook, a roadmap to make your own organization 95% stronger in just 3 months. If you implement even half of it, you will be ahead of most of the industry. Now, I'd really love to hear from you. Do you think governments should step in with mandatory cyber resilience standards, the same way they regulate safety or emissions? Or should private companies bear that responsibility alone? Drop your thoughts in the comment below. And if you have found this valuable, please hit like, share it with your team, and make sure you subscribe to the Daily Signal, where every week we break down the biggest cyber stories and turn them into lessons you can actually use. You can grab the RBI checklist and the recovery playbook PDF from the links below. I'm Max, Point Break Security. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay resilient, and I'll see you in the next one.